and important. In Europe, as you know, when we try to get to what an object is, it's thanks to our physicists, we realize that it's really energy in an arrangement and isn't really there in the physical sense. But we haven't even gotten to Locke yet, where we talk about what that meant. But so he's a contemporary that's alive and writing lots of stuff and influencing a lot of people. He does nice essays as well. He's the one in his the worldview of Western capitalism, I think is the English title of it, talks about how tourism, where did it come from? Well, you could trace it to the the explorers, the European explorers, of course, Columbus, and, a lot of others. And the recognition that, there's a lot of blank spaces on our maps, and we want to fill those in, find out what's here, trying to get to the pole, all this stuff, of course, pre-Google, so you didn't just go on the Google Earth and hover over the Earth and decide, let's look here. But so he treats it as if it's a virus. That people, spread this virus, this interest, this kind of desire to be every space, to somehow have, for me the icon is the big Winnebago that has the map of the United States on it with the colored states of the people, of the ones that they've driven through, And you think, what is the purpose of this, right? There's a lot of places on the earth that's like, who the heck wants to go there? Why go there just so you could put a sticker on your Winnebago? And personally, if I go on Google Earth and I visit a church and I see all the stuff on the church, I'm good with that. I don't have to go there and get in the line that takes hours in the hot sun, pay your 10 euros to get in so you can see what I just saw on Google. Plus you have to stay in a hotel, you have to have flown there, you have to have your visa, your passport, whatever, you have to have all your shots, but you're going to get sick anyway because you're meeting all these foreign germs that you haven't had the chance to meet while you were at home in Anchorage where you're safe. You get the idea, I don't. Plus, if you think of it as a virus that people catch, and I have friends that what do they want to do? They want to go travel and see all these different places, and I'm thinking, they're ill. They've caught this disease that makes them think they ought to be every place. Well, Peter Sloterdijk was the one that just hit me with that. When I was reading one of his essays, and I was like, he's right. Why do we? I lived in Berlin. I lived in, I've traveled in Europe, up and down Germany. I've seen enough. Actually, I'm good. I've even been in Juarez for like half a day. And that was my explore into Mexico. I'm fine with that. I don't need to visit these Mexican countries. Jürgen Habermas is just about dead. He's not completely dead. That's Princess Bride, right? He's mostly dead, but not completely dead. But very important and very American, even though he's German. So he's a pragmatist. Sam Harris, probably a lot of people are familiar with him. He's a relatively young guy. He's got a podcast. He's got lots of books. He's very intriguing. He's a utilitarian. Charles Taylor's a Canadian philosopher. Also almost dead, 90-something maybe, or late 80s. But very, very important. Lots of really important books clearly an important writer. Alistair McGrath I find really neat because he is a PhD in biology, theology, and international studies, I think. So 3 PhDs. And he writes really beautiful books. He's also a fan of C.S. Lewis and has written books on C.S. Lewis. And he's into understanding Christianity as a meta-narrative. And he's got a great debate with Richard Dawkins that demonstrates Richard Dawkins doesn't know what he's talking about when he gets into religious meta-narration. You know, it's just pretty cool. Martha Nussbaum, I think, is the sexiest philosopher on my list. At least, you know, I mean, you know, thinking of the age and everything and the way she appeared years ago and, you know, different interviews and so on. And so I think of her not only in that light, but also in the sense that she's an Aristotelian and works with legal issues, moral issues. I believe she still teaches at the University of Chicago. She lives like just a short jog from, or at least her office at the university, to Lake Michigan. And she's won all kinds of awards, so she's impressive. Hilary Putnam is a pragmatist, engages a lot with Quine and other issues, contemporary issues. I think he just died recently, Hilary Putnam. Slavoj Žižek is absolutely outrageously funny and interesting. He's was born in communist Yugoslavia, and because of his academic interests, the communist government wouldn't give him a job except to just do research, so he just started doing research and writing books. So on his flyleaf he says, Slavoj Žižek was born, writes books, and will die, you know. And he's fascinating. His main thing to do is to figure out some way of saying just the opposite of what everybody thinks. Which, if you'll recall, that's what Voltaire suggested to Jean-Jacques Rousseau. How do you become famous? Write books saying just the opposite of what everybody believes. And you will be famous. And it worked for him. Alain Badiou is almost dead too. He's so old. You know how that works. And he's French, and his English isn't that good, but he's very important in France. Peter Singer, I think, is still at Princeton, and he's very important. He's especially, he talks about animal rights and being a vegetarian, vegan actually, not just a vegetarian. And he's also morally very concerned about how we have such a wealth divide between people like me and people that are not even able to feed their children. I instead, you know, give extraordinarily quality dog food to my dogs, while there are children out there that are starving. David Chalmers is a body-mind person. His most important phrase that has ever passed his lips, I guess, was the really hard problem of consciousness. You know, so that's David Chalmers. David Chalmers, by the way, has been here. He gave our philosophy conference lecture. And multiple other things during 3 or 4 days. That was before he moved to New York University, or is it Columbia? One of those. But he used to be a professor in Australia, and he looked at. So when he was here, he had more, you know, and a rough leather jacket plus a girlfriend that looked like she looked closer to Indiana Jones, maybe, than you'd imagine. Alistair McGrath. Wait a minute, am I going backwards? Yeah, I'm way down here. David Chalmers. Judith Butler is a person who primarily argues about in a manner of speaking, her Judith's main concern is gender. Judith argues that there's 450 different gender types and what gives a person gender is their performance in a particular role that enables them to have a particular gender from that moment to whenever they switch to a different role. And there's roughly 450 different roles. And I keep trying to refer to Judith Butler as Judith Butler because Judith is one of those that does the pronoun thing. So occasionally, at least, Judith prefers to be referred to as them or they, which makes it hard grammatically for me to keep honoring Judith's choice, and yet speak normally. Frederick Jamison just died 2 Sundays ago at 90 years old, and he's difficult. I think I mentioned when he died in class that his one award was for the worst writing, but as a postmodernist, that's kind of a clue to whether they're good at postmodernism or not. It's how difficult they are to understand, which we'll talk about the next to last class of the semester. He died. You'd still use him, of course, if you're curious. A.C. Grayling, I highly recommend. He's very clear. He does espouse atheism. I have a couple other disagreements with him, but basically he's really good, writes a lot, and has engaged university practices with creating his own university in London that you had to pay a lot for, but he hired a lot of really important people to come in and lecture. So it was very elitist. Philip Kitcher is an American philosopher, even though he's originally from England, and his writing is really interesting on the nature of science, mathematics, and he's not that difficult. He's actually pretty interesting. Francis Fukuyama is an American philosopher. He's at Stanford. He's been a lot of things. He was on, he's considered a neocon for a while. Neocon, new conservative, supported the Bush doctrine and so on back when President George W. Bush was president. Part of the think tanks, a couple of different think tanks. The one he's part of now, I think, is the one at Stanford where he works. Steven Pinker is a psychology professor at Harvard, and I think his greatest accomplishment is marrying Rebecca Goldstein, who is a philosophy professor at I'm not sure which university she's at right now. Not at Harvard. And she writes lots of really good books. Plato and the Googleplex was a bestseller. She also wrote a book on Gödel called Gödel, and I think she's terrific. And she's married to Steven Pinker, which was one of the best things she ever did. So it's a pretty interesting combination between the two of them. Might even be interested if you're picking either one or both of them to do both of them, which would be interesting, I think. Cornel West, I think, is still running for president, even though no one ever hears about his campaigns, and I don't know why that is, because he's clearly the smartest of the ones running for office right now, and a terrific philosopher. I believe he teaches at Union Seminary right now. He had been teaching at Harvard, and he was pissed off at them because they wouldn't give him the same kind of contract that he expected, and so he left them and went back to Union Seminary. He's especially terrific to listen to, because when he gives a lecture, he's got that Southern Baptist tradition of delivering a sermon. I mean, he's terrific that way.
That's Cornel that way?
Yes, Cornel West. He's got some interesting characteristics. He's never had his teeth fixed, so he's got a really huge gap between the front two teeth, but you don't need to know that. It's just that whenever you see him talking, you notice, hey, he's got a big gap there. Plus, it's interesting, he wears the opposite of a priest. He's got a black scarf that he always wears as part of his so he's fascinating and has done lots of really interesting things. And don't be fooled. He is brilliant. So if you look at him, you might not realize, hey, wait a minute, but this guy is brilliant. Douglas Hofstadter is also brilliant. Perhaps, though, I should take him off of the list. I don't know, because his books are like Gödel, Escher, Bach, the weave of language. He's really into language, and I love that aspect of what he talks about. Susan Haig is especially into law and ethics. She has a really good book out on evil. Tariq Ramadan he was the head of Oxford's Islamic department in England, but because of some sexual dalliance issues, he was, I don't know if he was fired, but he at least fled from England so he wouldn't be arrested, I guess. So I think he's in France now. He writes lots of interesting books. And one of the things he recommends to Islamists is that they calm down, not be so violent, just enjoy Islam as a way of life, of peace and so on, and have lots of children, and eventually Islam will take over Europe just because of the population of Islamists. So it's kind of interesting. Reza Aslan is a author, has written Zillat, How to Win a Religious War, I think, is another one of his books. He's been here and lectured in the Wendy Williamson. He used to be, and might still be, depending on what issues are on TV, the go-to person for comments about Islam and so on. No God But God is one of his other books. So he is Islamic, and yet Zillat is a book about Jesus. But he was the one that when the Arab Spring was going on, remember Tahrir Square and everything that was going on in Egypt, that actually overthrew the government there, but then the government that came in was just the opposite of what they had hoped. And so then that was overthrown, and now, of course, we're back to square one, essentially, in Egypt. But there were some other revolutions that went on. The one in Syria, of course, broke out into a civil war that just hasn't helped anybody. But Reza argued that Islam was going through its reformation, which he argued that it needed to do in order to become more modern. So that's pretty interesting. Bernard Henry Levy is one of the most important contemporary philosophers in France, who actually has a tremendous impact on the government. He's the one that encouraged the attack in Libya against Muammar Gaddafi. He's involved in a lot of political things, and he's also very sexy. So, he typically wears a loose jacket, like a business jacket, but he has a white shirt underneath it that he doesn't button at all. And I remember one person says, "Why don't you button your shirt?" And he says, "Because I am so hot." So that's fun. Patricia Churchland and Paul Churchland are both philosophers in mind. They do a lot of trying to understand the really hard problem of consciousness. Richard Dawkins is a biologist that ought to stay out of philosophy but doesn't. He's a fantastic biologist, I suppose. The Selfish Gene was the book that kind of made him famous. And on page 198 of The Selfish Gene, he came up with the idea of a meme. And one of his students, Susan Blackmore, took that and made it her graduate interest and wrote a book called The Meme Machine. And by the way, we use that phrase, we use the concept of a meme all over the place. But the Selfish Gene was also kind of silly because, of course, genes can't be selfish, nor can they be, they don't have personalities, basically. The trouble with genes, not cells or anything else, but genes. Still, it's interesting. Jordan Peterson, he's a I skipped a couple people, didn't I? Alvin Plantinga, I think is still alive, but again, another person who's almost completely dead. We almost had him here just a couple years ago as our guest speaker for our conference, and he canceled on us because of his health, which of course makes absolute sense. We ended up getting someone else. Alistair McIntyre, another really old, absolutely wonderful philosopher, emeritus from Notre Dame University, and an Aristotelian Aquinas philosopher, and talks a lot about ethics. That's his main concern. And